Hello, and welcome to the Introduction to Active Learning session of the Early Connections Conference 2021. I'm glad you're here, and I hope you will learn some helpful information about active learning during this session. My name is Theresa Johnson. I'm an OT here at Perkins in the Deaf-Blind program. I've been working with children for many years in a variety of settings, but most recently here in the Deaf-Blind program for the past 5 years. I've been training and utilizing the active learning approach with our students here, and I hope to give you some information today about this strategy and how it may be helpful for your own children. I'd like to start by giving you some information about what active learning actually is. It's an educational approach that emphasizes that all individuals learn best by actively participating. It was created by Dr. Lily Nielsen, who was an educator and psychologist from Denmark, and is based on her extensive research. She spent about 40 years of her life working on research and creating this strategy. It was created for individuals with visual impairments and deafblindness, but it can also be used with individuals who have multiple disabilities as well. It's based on human developmental levels, and it's geared toward individuals at the 0 to 48-month developmental age range, regardless of chronological age. Here I'd like to offer some additional resources about the active learning philosophy. These are places you can go if you want to learn even more about the theories and implementation of this practice. Because active learning is a complex educational approach with many intricacies, we'll only have time for an introduction to this philosophy during this session. But if you're looking for more information, one of the best places to find it is the website www.activelearningspace.org. This is a website that was created in collaboration between the Pemberton Center for Blind Children, Texas School for the Blind, Perkins School for the Blind, all in an effort to have information about this approach available to educators and families. The website has a host of information, including videos of children participating in active learning, a special section for families with tips about using this approach at home, information about different equipment and materials that can be used, and much, much more. It's a wealth of information all in that one website. Additionally, there are several books written by Dr. Lily Nielsen. Perkins Library has several of these books, but they can also be found on the website, the Active Learning Space website, or Amazon or some public libraries. And they include Are You Blind?, Early Learning Step by Step, Space and Self, The Comprehending Hand, and a few others. There are 5 key points of active learning that should consistently be present when using an active learning approach. The first is activity. This means an individual should be actively participating in whatever way is possible for him or her. It could mean using hands, feet, head, or even mouth movements to explore and engage. The second is repetition. There should be opportunities built into the activity that allow the child to repeat their actions again and again. The third is developmental learning. This means the activity shouldn't be too hard or too easy for the child. An example of this is if a child doesn't have the hand skills to hold onto a ball, then a ball throwing activity would not be a developmentally appropriate activity for that child. The fourth is reinforcement. The activity or materials should be interesting and motivating. There should be something about the activity that engages the child and encourages them to continue being active. The fifth is limited interruptions. While we always want to be encouraging and supportive to children, sometimes we need to back off and be quiet to allow them time to explore and figure things out on their own. As an example for us as an adult, if you are driving in an unfamiliar area, slightly lost and looking for an address, you might turn down your radio or ask the kids in the back seat to quiet down. All this is done to decrease the interruptions or distractions so that you can concentrate better. And the same can be true for our kiddos when they're exploring and learning. In this picture, we see a child playing with a positioning board. We'll talk a little bit later about that piece of equipment, but you can see that she's able to interact with the objects, and because they're attached to the board by an elastic, she's able to repeat her actions with the items over and over again. When thinking about how children learn, it's important to consider the pathways used to get information. We gather information about our environment through our senses. For children who have impairments to some of these senses, we have to determine which pathways are the most useful for that individual, and then create an environment that supports those pathways by choosing the appropriate materials. For a child who's completely blind, using materials that are shiny and bright is not important. In that case, we might consider materials that have interesting texture or sound qualities. But shiny and bright objects might be exactly what a child with CVI needs in order to use the visual pathway as well as possible. It's important that we be prepared to wait and to give the child extra time. Because of limitations in some of their sensory pathways, it may take them longer to gather information. In addition, we want to keep the environment and materials fun and interesting by knowing what the child likes or dislikes. The dynamic learning circle, as described by Dr. Nielsen, shows how learning happens. This is a process that happens in all learning for all individuals. First, in stage 1, an individual becomes aware and interested. Stage 2 involves being curious and active. In stage 3, there is completion of learning, and in stage 4, the individual is ready for a new challenge. We'll talk in more detail about each stage in the next slides. It's important to be able to recognize each stage of the dynamic learning circle so we can make adjustments to the environment to promote continued learning. In stage 1, the child becomes aware and interested. They may develop awareness of their own motor and sensory actions, movements of their body, and what that feels like. They can also become aware of an object or a person in the environment. This awareness and interest in their actions and environment must be present for the learning circle to continue. Stage 2 involves being curious and active. This is when we see the initiation of activity by the child. The child's now aware and interested and begins to take actions to find out more, to investigate, and to explore. Here we'll see the repetition of actions by the child as they start establishing knowledge in the form of memories. We may begin to see some interactions with others. The child may imitate the actions you do. If you bang a brush on the table, they may bang a brush on the table. We may see some communication with others, both verbal and non-verbal, as the child begins to share experiences with others. In stage 3, the child has familiarity with the objects that he was curious and active with during stage 2. The actions with that object now become a common part of the child's everyday patterns. In this picture, we see a little girl who has learned to move the bow across the strings of an instrument. Now, each time she holds the bow, she moves it across the strings. Children in this stage have learned everything about the object and its properties. After a period of time being active with that object, they may look fussy or bored, or they may stop being active with the object. This behavior can suggest that the child is ready to move to stage 4. When a child is in stage 4, it means they are ready for a new challenge. They're ready to experience new sensory and motor actions. This readiness leads the child to return to stage 1 with a new item or idea to start the dynamic learning circle all over again. When leading a child to a new opportunity, it should be within the child's developmental level, and it should be only slightly different than previous items or activities. The little girl in this picture has learned to bang utensils on a bowl. One way we could offer a new challenge and to start the dynamic learning circle over again would be to flip the bowl over and add a golf ball. Suddenly, what she knew about the ball and the utensils is different. If she's aware and interested in the novelty of the golf ball in the bowl, Then the dynamic circle will begin again, and her learning and understanding will expand. She'll become curious and active with the ball. Now, if she were to bang the utensils on the bowl, as she had done before, the ball inside would move and bounce, creating new sound and feel to the bowl. She may try new actions with the utensils, like putting them into the bowl and then banging or pushing on the ball. Next, we're going to talk about the importance of movement. Movement is central to brain development and learning in all human beings. It's important in promoting the learning of foundational concepts such as spatial awareness, cause and effect, comparing and contrasting, sensory processing, including tactile awareness and body awareness, problem-solving skills, and fine and gross motor skills. Children with significant physical and health challenges who are visually impaired are at risk of having limited opportunities to move due to things like necessary bracing. They may wear a body brace or arms or foot braces, supportive seating and positioning, things like wheelchairs and standers, muscle control challenges. Their muscles may be tight and not allowing them to move, environmental safety concerns, or other medical issues. It's very important that individuals with significant disabilities get opportunities to move because of the critical role that movement plays in improving health, enhancing quality of life, promoting the ability to learn and make sense of their world, allowing for engagement with others in meaningful ways, creating opportunities for individuals to make choices and become self-determined, and allowing children to have an impact on the world around them. There are tremendous benefits from learning to move, even if it's in limited ways. Using an active learning approach can help children with disabilities learn to move by providing learning materials that match the sensory pathways the child uses best, that match the child's sensory preferences, they are interesting and motivating, and that match the developmental level of the child. In this picture, we see a child with her feet in a metal pan filled with glass beads. She also has a red vibrating switch, which she's turning on by pushing her feet against it. These items all have strong features. The metal pan is cool, shiny, and loud as the beads move in it, and the vibrating switch adds movement and more sound to the other items. She is being given the opportunity to actively engage in whatever way she is able and interested in doing. In this case, that's by using her feet. In looking at motor skills, we know that they develop in some predictable and sequential ways. Reflexive movements occur first in early infancy and become intentional movements over time. Motor skills develop from top to bottom, meaning head to toe. We see this in the way infants first learn to control their head movements. Then they learn to push up on their hands, then crawl on their hands and knees, and finally stand and walk. Motor skills also develop from the center of the body first, moving outward toward the fingers and toes. And lastly, movement develops from gross motor or large motor skills to fine motor. One example of this is the fact that children learn to move their whole arms to reach before they can manipulate small items in their hands like scissors or buttons. Movements can be accidental or reflexive initially, but can become more intentional and more controlled over time when given repeated experiences. I'm sure you can imagine that young baby who's had many random swatting movements toward a dangling toy for a period of time, and then finally gets a hold of that toy after many, many tries. Here I have a video of a young girl sitting in her wheelchair and interacting with some materials that are suspended from a frame in front of her. This child has a lot of irregular movements of her arms and has limited control of the movements, but we'll watch as she interacts with these items. You can see that her left hand has become sort of hooked onto the orange tube accidentally, but that's allowing her to use her movements to interact with the items. That big movement with her right arm was probably accidental, but she heard those things move on the right, and then she turns to look and moves her right hand more than we've seen her moving that right hand before. So while it can be challenging to know which of her movements are intentional, what matters most is that she has the opportunity to see that her movements are resulting in objects moving and making noise and rubbing against her body. This can motivate her to keep putting effort in to move her body intentionally to get those results again. Next, we'll talk about materials and how to go about choosing what materials might be best for your child. When thinking about the qualities of the materials we use, we want to consider using materials that have strong salient characteristics: visual, auditory, tactile, movement, smell, or even taste. Items that have strong features in any of those categories. Common everyday items are also highly recommended, things that the child is likely to come in contact with throughout their day. Some examples of these types of materials include strings of beads, wooden or metal utensils, bells, chimes, instruments, various kinds of brushes, hair brushes, toothbrushes, scrub brushes, keys, stones or pebbles, pie plates, ping pong balls, chains, magnets, sponges, a metal bucket, springs, mylar paper, packing peanuts, cups, bowls, containers. Many household items that you have hanging around have strong features and would be valuable tools to use when using an active learning approach with your child. Here are some examples of materials you can offer to your child while using an active learning approach. Some of these things we made here at Perkins, some were made at home during quarantine, and some are things you can purchase either locally or on the Active Learning website. First, on the top left, we have some kitchen items: bowls, utensils, measuring cups. These things are great because they are common items and they have strong tactile, visual, and auditory features. In the next photo, we have caps we've saved from various containers. These can be used in whatever creative way you can think of, such as sorting, putting in and taking out of other containers, or stringing them together to make shakers or instruments. Also in this picture we have chains. They can be played with as is or dangled from a frame to encourage swatting, batting, and grabbing. And the last item in this picture is hot pink duct tape. This might be good for its bright color or for its sticky texture. In the next picture, we have many interlocking materials, items that can be pushed together or pulled apart, such as Legos, bristle blocks, brushes, or magnets. These kinds of items help children work on constructive play skills, which are skills that are important in developing other skills that are needed for future independence in things like getting dressed and cooking. Next, we have a picture of different containers with various items inside. Containers are wonderful for putting things in and out, for banging to create sound, for tipping over or rolling, possibly even squeezing to make different sounds. Having a variety of textures, especially tin, metal, or wood, is very important because so much of what children play with is made of plastic. On the bottom row, we have nesting cups. You could use regular plastic cups for stacking or inserting, banging together, etc. also. The next picture shows various brushes. Kids can learn about texture, pushing together and pulling apart, hard and soft, rubbing the bristles, and eventually even the true function of a brush. It's important for kids who have visual impairments to have the opportunity to actively explore with these items so they can learn things that they would not be able to learn by looking or watching, as sighted children can do. The next picture shows a vest from the Active Learning website that has different items velcroed to it. This could be offered to a child who keeps their hands close to their body or who doesn't have the motor skills to reach out in front of them to play with things. In that case, it's important that rather than using our hands to guide a child to reach out to interact with items, which could be uncomfortable or even beyond their developmental level, that instead we bring the items to where the child's hands are. This allows that child to explore and be active in a way that matches his or her skill level and comfort. In the last picture is just a quick item that I made for a family during quarantine with random scraps that I had at home. It's just a piece of cardboard with a little frayed edging to create texture and sound, and some ribbons, beads, mylar gift wrapping paper, foil, strings, and rubber bands, all to create a texture mat that would allow our child to use small movements of their body to see, feel, and hear the items while exploring with it. I hope this slide gives you an idea of how everyday items can be useful learning tools, allowing children to explore, compare, and determine different properties of materials and what they can do. This slide shows some of the bigger pieces of equipment that Dr. Nielsen designed based on her research. They can be purchased through the link on the Active Learning website. The first is the HOPSA, which is an acronym, HOPSA, and it supports a child in an upright position, allowing them to move their head, arms, legs freely in whatever way they're able to. It's used on a ceiling track, and it allows the child to move by using very gentle movements of their arms or legs. So for a child who would otherwise be in a wheelchair, this gives them an opportunity to move about and to control that movement independently. The next item on the top is an SF board, which has two pieces of wood with springs in between. This little girl is sitting on one. It can be used to allow children to experience the effects of their own movements and also to strengthen core muscles, neck muscles, or muscles of their extremities, arms and legs. Under the SF board is probably Dr. Nielsen's most well-known piece of equipment, the Little Room. This is sort of a four-sided box that has items hanging from the top and attached to the sides to allow a child to explore while lying on their back or sitting inside of the Little Room. It's used on a resonance board, as you can see, the wood underneath, which enhances the sound and vibration that the items make to give the child even more sensory information as they're exploring. Next, we see a positioning board. This is something we saw earlier in this session. There was a young girl sitting and playing with a board like this. This item is just a type of pegboard that has various interesting objects tied to it by elastic, and that encourages batting, grasping, pulling, and even throwing, while also keeping the items in the same location, so the child can find them again and repeat the same actions over and over again. And the last picture shows a support bench. This was designed for a child who has cerebral palsy and has limited movements due to increased muscle tone or tightness. It allows the child to use his hands or feet to explore in a way that is accessible to him. You can also see the SF board tipped on its side at his feet in this photo, which gives him the opportunity to push and move something with his feet while he's playing. As we've discussed, in order to ensure learning and growth, it is extremely important to choose the objects and methods of presentation that are most appropriate and specific for your child. To do that, we need to consider the sensory pathways that are best for that child, the sensory preferences and interests of that child, the developmental skills the child currently is able to do, and the position of the child to allow access to the materials and movement of specific body parts. We also always want to allow plenty of time for the child to interact and explore. Next, I have a video of another young girl sitting in a wheelchair. She also has some materials suspended nearby on her left. This child has a repetitive self-stimulatory behavior of bringing her right hand to her mouth and licking it, or making raspberry sounds with her mouth. We'll watch her for about a minute or so. This child has CVI and has limited movement of her arms. While there are interesting and potentially motivating materials nearby, she can't access those materials. Due to her CVI and the way the materials are presented, it's likely she can't see them, and due to the limitations in the way she moves her arms, she's unable to physically interact with them. Rather than being active with these materials, she spends her time engaging in a self-stimulatory behavior. Now I have a second video of the same child with a different setup. In this video, CVI accommodations have been made by reducing the room lighting, reducing visual clutter in her space, and providing backlighting for the task at hand. Additionally, different materials were chosen for her. Now she has been given a tray that has several items with salient features attached by elastic. This tray allows her to use the small, irregular movements that she has to actively engage with the items. And again, we'll watch her for about a minute. Now that the materials have been matched to her sensory pathways, her skill level, and her interests, she can actively engage and learn about the materials and about her own actions on these materials. I also want to point out that in the first video, we saw her repetitive self-stimulatory behavior quite a bit, about 40 times in that 1-minute video clip. And in this second video, we see this behavior only 5 times in just over a minute. Being actively engaged decreases the need and opportunity to perform self-stimulatory actions. I think those last 2 videos help to illustrate the importance of choosing the right materials to allow the child access to them and to promote learning and growth. This means choosing accessible sensory pathways, materials with salient auditory features if they use hearing, textures if they use their hands predominantly, etc. And choosing the appropriate developmental level for that child, objects that require skills that the child has, but also allows room to build new skills. And lastly, choosing materials that are interesting and reinforcing. Finally, to summarize what we have learned about active learning today and its many benefits, I want to reiterate that active learning supports growth and learning through active engagement and exploration. It allows opportunities for repeated motor actions to build understanding. It provides enjoyable and reinforcing materials and interactions, and it encourages self-initiated problem solving and skill development. The content of this session is based on the work of Dr. Lily Nielsen and the Active Learning Space website. More information can be found on that website as we have discussed. Thank you for being here today. I hope you found this interesting and that you are excited to try this approach with your children to help them continue to learn and grow. Thank you.